Today, we will be exploring how to make a custom photorealistic texture for Minecraft using Blender. To start off, we're going to delete the default cube. We're then going to add in a new cube. This will be our reference for our Minecraft block. I'm also going to add in a plane. This will be where we primarily view our texture. I'm going to grab this plane and move it up. I'm using an add-on called Screencast Keys. You can see all my keystrokes down here in the bottom left. If at any time you get confused as to what hotkeys I'm pressing, everything will be displayed down here. To start off, we're going to go into our shading tab. I'm going to create a new material, and this is where we'll make our texture. The texture that I'm going for is the iron block. I'm using a program called PureF for a couple reference images on the iron block. I'm going to be basing it off of the vanilla texture, but still make it photorealistic. These lines right here are going to be made with a wave texture, and this border will be made with a brick texture. To start, I'm going to press Shift A and add in a brick texture. I'm also going to add in a wave texture. So as you can see here, these two textures cannot be applied at the same time by default. We're going to need something called a mix node. Change the mix node to color, and as you'll see, it combines both the wave texture and the brick texture. Depending on which input is on top or bottom, 0 in this case is the brick texture, and 1 is our wave texture. I'm going to set the blending mode to darken, as I found this is what works best. I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on. To get the Node Wrangler add-on, go up into Edit, Preferences, Add-ons, and search for Node Wrangler. Then, click this. Using the add-on, we can press Ctrl-Shift and click on our brick texture to only select that. We can press Ctrl-Shift back again on our principled BSDF to see our final result. I'm going to isolate the brick texture and scale it so we have some sort of boundary. But as you can see here, the bricks are different sizes and they're offset. So I'm going to set the brick width and the brick height to the same number. I found 0.2 works for me. Then I'm going to set the scale. You can increase or decrease the mortar size to change the thickness of your border. I'm also going to decrease the bias all the way to -1. This will match our color 1 color. Now let's make this wave texture match our iron block here. We can change the scale of the wave texture to increase or decrease the amount of lines. You can always change these values later, so don't worry about getting it correct the first time. We're then going to add a bit of noise to the edges of this brick texture so that it's not a solid line. I'm going to add in a noise texture and plug in this to our mortar smooth. As you can see, it adds in a bit of variation to the border. You can increase or decrease the detail to your liking, but keep in mind that Minecraft textures are viewed from kind of far away, so try not to go too in depth on your detail. You can also add a bit of variation to your wave texture. This is not required, as I want the wave texture to be very faint. We can add in a color ramp node. You can now see that we can make blacker blacks or whiter whites, or somewhere in the middle. Another thing I'm going to do is add a bit of variation for the mortar. You can make it a bit stronger with the sliders here. Right now, these lines are way too strong. To fix this, I'm going to use a color ramp node to change the strength of the lines. I'm going to move this up a bit until the lines are about as faint or as strong as I want them. I'm also going to increase the amount of lines. The border also looks a bit too strong. I can use one color ramp node to change that instead of these individual color ramps. Since this is photorealistic, we're going to want to be in the cycles render mode. If you have a GPU, I suggest you use GPU compute as it usually does things a bit faster. If you notice, our texture is not very metallic. To fix this, we can go to our principled BSDF and increase the metallic slider. You can also plug in our result into the roughness slider. This will give us different roughnesses on different parts. If you Control Shift and click on this, you can kind of see how the roughness map is going to turn out. The lighter things are more matte, and the blacker things are more shiny. I want this to be a bit more shiny, so I'm going to use a color ramp node and make things a bit darker. I don't want things to be too shiny, as this can look unrealistic. Since this iron is one material, there's not going to be much variation in the roughness. I'm also going to add in an HDRI so we can get a more accurate representation of the lighting. I'm using an add-on called Easy HDRI. I made this Minecraft HDRI. If you would like a tutorial on this, please let me know. This texture is still looking a bit cartoony. I'm going to add another mix node, set this to color, and mix this with a noise texture. As you can see here, it adds in more noise to our overall texture. I'm going to make this a bit stronger with a color ramp and set the blending mode to overlay, as I think that looks pretty good with this. I'm also going to fuzz out the lines a bit by increasing the slider, as I don't want them to be that intense. Let's look at it in our render mode. Sometimes having another light here helps, as you can see the reflections pretty easily. I am going to increase this light to around 3,000, maybe 5,000. And as you can see, our texture is looking pretty okay so far. I still think these edges are a bit too dark, so I will increase this a bit to make them more faint. You can also set this block to our material, but as you can see, only the top has the texture. We don't have to worry about this for now, as in Minecraft the texture will be applied to all sides. Now we're going to add in a normal map. The normal map will fake bump, and will make for some more realistic textures. I'm going to plug in the normal into the normal right here, and I'm going to duplicate this 3 times. One for the noise texture, one for our wave texture, and one for our brick texture, which are the 3 textures that I want to have bump. While I'm at it, I'm also going to make the noise texture a bit more detailed. I'm then going to plug in the noise into our height here, our color into our height here, and our brick texture also into the height over here. I'm then going to plug in the normal into the normal for all of these. But as you can see, it looks a bit intense. So what we can do is decrease the distance. I'm going to do this to around 0.1, 0.1, and 0.1. It still looks a bit intense, which I think is a result of the roughness, which I'm going to increase the roughness a bit. I'm also going to invert everything. I'm actually going to switch around our wave texture and our brick texture in the normal. So I'm going to change our brick texture over to our wave texture one, and our wave texture over to our brick texture one, which will overlay our brick texture on top of our wave texture. I'm just going to mess around with all these things here until I get the result that I like. Okay, so this is looking pretty good. There is one issue with this, and that is it is not seamless. Meaning, if I were to duplicate this and move it over a bit, these noise textures do not line up. As you can see, there's a harsh contrast between the two. In order to fix this, we're going to do a bit of math that I'm not sure I understand, but it works. Essentially, what we're doing is we're wrapping around the 3D space in the 4D space. That probably doesn't make much sense, but it doesn't really have to. So we're going to get a texture coordinate. We're also going to get a vector math node. Set this to scale. We're going to get a separate XYZ node. Plug this in, and set our scale to 2 multiplied by pi. Next, we're going to add in a math node. Set this to sine. Make another one, set it to cosine. And make another one, set it to sine. And duplicate this. And we're going to plug in the x into sine, x into cosine, our y into sine, and our y into cosine. Next, we're going to combine our xyz, combine our x, combine our y, and combine our z. Now you will notice that there is an extra one right here, which is our w, or our 4th dimension. So set anything that can be set to 4D, set it to 4D. So we're also going to set this to 4D. It's also important, if it cannot be set to 4D, as to line it up as seamless as possible. We're going to plug our vector into our vector, and our cosine into our W. Do that again for our other noise texture. Vector into our vector, and our cosine into our W. So I'm also going to get a color ramp. I guess our pre-existing color ramp. I'm going to increase this line so that way our seam is not there. See that we can tile these, and there is no visible seam. Isn't that sweet? Now, one side effect of this is that it does increase the scale of the noise texture, which you just divide this by 4 or something like that. You can get it back to normal, unless this is what you want. Now, these iron blocks kind of do look like steel farmland or something like that. So I am going to mess around with a bit more settings so that it doesn't look like that. Okay, so that looks pretty good for now. So the next thing that we want to do is make this a texture. So to do this, we're going to head over, first of all, make sure you're in cycles. We're going to head over to this bake tab under the render properties tab. We're going to set this bake type to diffuse and make sure you uncheck direct and indirect. We're going to create a new image texture. New, I want it to be 1024 by 1024. You can make it higher, larger, but it does help if it's a multiple of 16. So any multiple of 16, in this case, it's 16 times 64, 16 times 64. And I'm going to name this iron underscore block. Now, when you're baking a diffuse texture, it's kind of weird. You got to remove the metallic slider for whatever reason. So just set the metallic all the way down to 0. We'll add it in later. So now with our plane selected and our iron block selected, we can press bake, and it'll basically bake the color data to this texture. This is our iron block texture. And it doesn't look exactly like this because we also have to make in our roughness data, our metallic data, and our normal data. But for now, let's save this. Okay, I'm going to save this. And next we're going to bake in our roughness map. So select our bake type to roughness and bake. Okay, now we're going to save this. as iron block underscore R. Now we're going to bake our metallic data, but there is no bake type for metallic, so we're just going to use our emit. Now in our case, our metallic is not controlled by a map. Usually objects are either 0% metallic or 100% metallic. The only time you would want to really specify your metallic type is if you had a map. Say you want one part of the texture to be wood and one part to be metal. You can then specify, similar to our roughness map here, what parts you want to be metallic and what parts you don't. But for us, it's just going to give us a black texture. We don't need to save this, as when we combine all the textures, we can just specify that there's nothing there. Or I guess that it's black. Next, we're going to bake our normal data, so set this to normal. Make sure this is selected and press bake. And now we have our normal data. And just going to save this as ironblock underscore n.png. Now what we're going to do is combine our roughness and our metallic map, so that way the Minecraft shader can read it. I'm going to create a new texture and remove this one. So we're going to remove our principled BSDF, and we're going to find where we stored our textures. Drop in your roughness map and your metallic map if you have one. We're going to use a combine color node to specify what channels are what maps. The shader reads the red channel as the roughness map, the green channel as the metallic map, and a blue channel as a mission map. Since we don't have the blue, we're going to leave it at 0. We're going to bring our green channel all the way up to specify that we want it to be metallic. In this case, white or 1 is metallic, and white or 1 in this case is roughness. But if you remember, Blender reads black as roughness, and the shader reads white as roughness. So all we have to do is put in an invert node to invert the colors, and we combine it again. It should give us this. We are then going to go into a render tab and bake it as an emission map. We're going to save this as iron underscore block underscore s. And that should be all of our textures. First, we have to drag these textures into a texture pack. If you don't know how to set up your own texture pack, there are plenty of tutorials online. If you want me to make one, please let me know. Once these textures are ready, you can go ahead and pack this up into a zip file. Next, we have to see if it works.